The moment was frozen in time, a piercing silence cutting through the air as security guards rushed toward the stage. At first, no one understood what had happened. The cameras shook, the crowd screamed, and then the truth hit like a wave. Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old conservative activist who had built one of the largest youth political movements in America, had been shot. A sniper's bullet had turned what was meant to be another high-energy Turning Point USA rally into the scene of a political assassination. The governor of Utah would later call it just that, an assassination. And yet, even in those first chaotic minutes, the weight of the moment was not just about his death. It was about the life he had lived, the movement he had led, and the polarizing legacy that had come to define him. The world was left asking, who exactly was Charlie Kirk, and how did he rise so quickly, only to be cut down so violently? Charlie's story began far from the stage lights and chaos of that September night. Born in the suburbs of Chicago in 1993, he grew up in a comfortable household, the son of a successful architect and a mother who nurtured his Christian faith. His childhood was marked not by privilege in the Hollywood sense, but by a sense of conviction instilled early on. He was not a star athlete, not the kid who seemed destined for fame or fortune. But he had a sharpness, a hunger to prove himself, and a knack for seeing opportunity where others saw walls. Even as a teenager, he was restless. While his peers were focused on college applications, Charlie was already turning his attention to something larger, shaping conversations, stirring debates, and ultimately, building a movement that would make him a household name. At just 18 years old, while most kids his age were figuring out dorm room assignments, Charlie co-founded Turning Point USA. What began as a scrappy idea between him and mentor Bill Montgomery would become a multi-million-dollar force in American politics. Charlie dropped out of community college almost as quickly as he had enrolled, convinced that his calling wasn't in classrooms but in rallying students on campuses across the nation. Within months of starting TPUSA, he caught the attention of powerful conservative donors. A chance encounter with investor Foster Friess at the 2012 Republican National Convention changed everything. Friess wrote the checks that would fund Kirk's dream, and from there, TPUSA was off to the races. The strategy was simple but groundbreaking. While Democrats had dominated youth outreach for decades, Kirk wanted to flip the script. He set out to make conservatism not just a political position, but a lifestyle brand. He and his team traveled relentlessly, staging debates, handing out flyers, and planting their message in the very places conservatives had often avoided. College campuses. By 2016, just 4 years after its founding, Turning Point USA was no longer a side project. It was a machine. Kirk was no longer the kid asking questions at forums, he was the one commanding the stage. And that summer, standing at the Republican National Convention, he became one of the youngest people ever to speak at the event. That night was a pivot point. The nation saw him not just as an organizer, but as a rising star. His energy was infectious, his rhetoric sharp, and his alignment with the new face of Republican politics undeniable. He had also caught the eye of the Trump family. During the campaign, Kirk forged a particularly close bond with Donald Trump Jr., serving as a personal aide and quickly becoming a trusted insider. By the time Donald Trump shocked the world and won the White House, Charlie Kirk was already being seen as the voice of the next conservative generation. But behind the applause and the bright lights of convention halls, something else was building: an intensity, an obsession, and a pressure that would only grow heavier with each passing year. The closer Charlie moved to the center of power, the faster the stakes climbed. His voice was no longer confined to campus quads or student unions, it was now on national television, on primetime radio, on podcasts where millions listened. He positioned himself as a fearless defender of conservative values, a disruptor who would confront professors, journalists, and politicians without hesitation. To his supporters, he was bold and brilliant, finally giving young conservatives a leader they could rally behind. To his critics, he was reckless, a provocateur playing with fire. The tension between those two perceptions fueled his rise. Turning Point USA expanded at a breakneck pace. Donors poured in millions, eager to see Charlie's model replicated across the country. By 2019, TPUSA claimed presence on over 1,000 college campuses, with more than 1,500 chapters. But it wasn't just about leaflets and club meetings anymore. The organization became known for its splashy annual conferences, where students were flown in from across the nation to hear from some of the biggest names in conservative politics. It became a networking hub, a breeding ground for future political operatives, and a stage where Charlie himself took on the role of firebrand leader. His rallies looked more like pop concerts than political meetings, blaring music, flashing lights, and a leader who spoke with the intensity of a preacher. But success came with shadows. Whispers began to swirl about the methods Scusa used to dominate campuses. Former staffers hinted at a culture of pressure, of constant fundraising demands, of loyalty tests that sometimes felt more like indoctrination than inspiration. Critics accused Kirk of running an empire built as much on spectacle as on substance. And when Donald Trump entered the White House, those criticisms only deepened. Charlie was no longer just leading a student group, he was hosting White House events, appearing in Oval Office photos, and becoming one of Trump's loudest cheerleaders. In 2019, he launched Students for Trump, another sprawling effort to ensure Trump's re-election in 2020. The move elevated him even further. Now he wasn't just shaping conservative youth, he was shaping the entire movement around one man. He became a regular presence on Fox News, a go-to voice on conservative podcasts, and the host of his own nationally syndicated radio show, The Charlie Kirk Show. With every broadcast, every rally, every viral clip, his influence spread. But so did the controversy. He was accused of pushing conspiracy theories, of stoking culture wars, of feeding division. His critics pointed to his harsh attacks on universities, his fierce opposition to progressive movements, and his unapologetic defense of Donald Trump even in the most turbulent moments of the presidency. Yet, for every article denouncing him, there were legions of students and young conservatives who idolized him. To them, Charlie Kirk wasn't just a political figure, he was proof that someone their age could take on the establishment and win. But the fire that lifted him up also burned hot around him. The 2020 election would test everything he had built. As the nation descended into chaos after the results, Charlie stood firmly on Trump's side, questioning the outcome and amplifying claims of fraud. His presence at the January 6 rally in Washington, where Scusa buses had transported young activists to the event, cast a shadow he could never fully escape. While he condemned the violence that followed, his name was forever tied to one of the darkest days in American democracy. And though he emerged legally untouched, the scrutiny was suffocating. Behind closed doors, his team worried. Could Charlie survive the fallout? Or had his ambition carried him into territory even he couldn't control? And yet, he didn't back down. Instead, he leaned in harder. His speeches grew sharper, his attacks on opponents more direct, his style even more confrontational. He became a fixture on stage at rallies long after Trump left office, helping to cement the former president's grip on the Republican base. It was during this time that fans began noticing something else, a certain strain in his voice, a visible weight in his expression. For a man constantly on the road, constantly performing at the highest intensity, cracks were inevitable. But few could have predicted just how dangerous those cracks would become, or how quickly his story would turn from triumph to tragedy. By 2021, Charlie Kirk was no longer just the face of a youth movement. He had become one of the most visible conservative personalities in the country. His podcast climbed charts, his radio show reached millions, and his conferences drew crowds that rivaled political rallies of sitting senators. Every word he spoke seemed designed to provoke, to ignite, to keep his base electrified. And yet, behind the thunder of applause and the spotlight glare, a quieter battle was unfolding. Those close to him spoke of a man under constant siege, working 18-hour days, carrying not just his own ambitions but the expectations of an entire movement. He was, at only 30, living a life most politicians don't touch until their 50s. The pressure showed. In one interview, his voice cracked when asked about his personal life, admitting with rare candor that his work consumed him. Friends confided that he slept little, that his phone never left his hand, that he was always preparing for the next speech, the next debate, the next crisis. To his supporters, this was evidence of his dedication. To his critics, it was a sign of obsession. But to Charlie, it was simply the cost of staying on top. His marriage to Erica Frantzva, a fellow conservative activist, offered glimpses of a softer side, a man who wanted family, faith, and stability. Photos of their wedding circulated widely, presenting an image of balance. Yet insiders whispered that the demands of his career left little room for anything else. Every trip, every appearance, every headline was another brick added to the wall he was building around himself. And while he smiled for the cameras, exhaustion crept in. Still, he pushed forward. His conferences grew in size and spectacle. Governors, senators, and presidential hopefuls lined up to share his stage. He launched Turning Point Action, a political arm that turned rallies into organizing powerhouses. He expanded into faith-based activism, creating Turning Point Faith to merge religious conviction with political energy. To some, he was becoming not just an activist but a kingmaker, capable of shaping the next generation of conservative leaders. And that power made him more of a target than ever before. There were protests at his events, threats online, and constant backlash in the media. He was loved and loathed in equal measure, his name synonymous with both hope and hostility. And through it all, he never blinked. At least not in public. But those who traveled with him began noticing the toll. The moments where he would sit alone, staring off before going on stage. The times when his tone turned sharp with his own team, snapping under pressure. The weight of carrying a movement was crushing, and though he would never admit it out loud, he knew it. Then came 2023, a year when the spotlight grew even harsher. His rallies drew not just students but entire families. His speeches weren't just about politics anymore, they were about destiny, culture, and the future of America. He was positioning himself as more than an activist, almost as a prophet of a new conservative awakening. And with that shift came darker threats. His security team ramped up measures. Organizers vetted crowds more carefully. But still, the sense of danger hovered. The bigger Charlie Kirk became, the greater the risk. And by 2024, even his allies began to wonder aloud, could he keep up this pace without something breaking? That question was answered one September evening in Utah. A rally meant to inspire turned into chaos as a single shot echoed through the night. Witnesses described the sound as a firecracker at first, before realizing the horror of what had unfolded. The crowd panicked, some ducking, others screaming, as security swarmed the stage. The governor's voice would later shake as he confirmed what many already feared. Charlie Kirk had been the target of an assassination. The news traveled faster than anyone could process. Within minutes, social media was flooded with disbelief, shock, and grief. Videos from the rally, shaky and blurred, showed the panic in real time, students crying, supporters screaming his name, the chaos of an evening that was supposed to energize but ended in heartbreak. For those who admired him, it felt unthinkable. For his critics, even some of the harshest voices paused to acknowledge the gravity of what had happened. An entire generation that had grown up hearing his voice on podcasts, at rallies, and on their college campuses was now confronted with silence. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from across the political spectrum. Donald Trump himself released a statement, calling Charlie a patriot, a fighter, and a man who had given everything for the cause he believed in. Prominent conservative figures described him as irreplaceable, the rare activist who had not only built a movement but embodied it. Even those who opposed him politically recognized the scale of his impact, acknowledging that few people his age had ever managed to leave such a mark on national discourse. But beyond the headlines and the political eulogies, it was the smaller, more personal stories that revealed the true weight of his legacy. A college student wrote about how meeting him at a Turning Point event had given her the courage to speak up in her classes. A former staffer described how Charlie's relentless drive pushed him to discover strengths he didn't know he had. His wife, Erica, released a statement through tears, calling him not just a leader but her partner, her anchor, and her best friend. These were the echoes of a life lived loudly, relentlessly, but also deeply. At just 31 years old, Charlie Kirk had compressed decades of influence into a few short years. From the moment he stepped onto the national stage, he had refused to play small. His critics may have called him divisive, but no one could call him irrelevant. He had forced conversations, ignited debates, and carved out a place in American history that even his death could not erase. His assassination was not just an attack on a man but on the movement he had built, a movement that now faces the question of whether it can survive without its founder's voice leading from the front. And yet, perhaps that is the final irony of his story. Charlie Kirk built an organization, a network, and a brand that was never just about him. He trained young leaders, mobilized